A politician is a person who has only one purpose: to understand the time and to follow the time, to make decisions that realize demands of the time. Now it is the time when, if you want to be a great country, you have to conquer souls and minds of people, not territories. It's not a matter of choice. It's a matter of the future. You either understand the future, you understand the time, or you live with ideas of the first half of the 20th century to the best, or even of the 19th century. And this conflict is the main problem. Tell me what to do. We need to cease fire. That's it. It's wrong to go to Istanbul and to beg for something or discuss something while everybody is killing everybody. I don't know how it's gonna end. I just know that this is suicidal. Grigory Alekseyevich, we saw each other more than 3 years ago, and one of the last questions I asked you back then was about your personal meetings with Putin. I asked you whether you met with him and how long ago, and you said that you met just recently and you discussed Ukraine. And 3 years ago, it didn't seem particularly urgent to me back then, but for some reason to you, it was extremely important back then. You said you were discussing Ukraine, you were discussing the war, you were discussing the army, and you said that people die every day in Ukraine. That's referring to the question that people keep asking, where were you 8 years ago? And 8 years ago, you were already there, you were talking to him about it. Could you give us some details of that conversation? Well, that was a very simple conversation. First of all, we had a plan of settlement in Donbass. I wrote it in 2017, and then it was a part of my presidential campaign in 2018. Besides, every time we met, and it wasn't often, I told him that I can work in that area in any capacity, to hold talks, to discuss the plan. This so-called people's diplomacy can be quite useful. And with him I had quite successful precedents before. So what do you mean by that? That was an old story. This is when President George W. Bush came to Moscow in May of 2002, and they signed a strategic cooperation agreement. Just imagine, between Russia and the United States. I offered it, and I was working on it for 6 months, and that was the result. Right now, it's not valid anymore. But actually, right now, this strategic cooperation agreement you could find on the website of the Kremlin. At least 1 month ago, it was there. But nothing followed after that. And if you ask me about the West, so this was an example of just a show and with no actions. You mean the West doesn't act? Yes, they don't act. So we have just 30 years since the end of the Soviet Union, but they have their democracy for 200 years or 500 years. You have to do politics. You need to do something all the time. You need to work. But they didn't, and they don't. What they do, they deal only with large economic, and I wouldn't even call them economic, They are dealing with profitable financial matters. And all the rest, they're trying to weasel out from it. You know, they once in 4 years, they have a presidential campaign first, they form the administration, then next 6 months they work a little bit, and then they're getting ready for the next campaign. And it seems like there is no time for politics. That's why they have such crisis there in the West, and the crisis is quite serious. Back to a meeting with Putin about Ukraine. What was your idea of making a settlement there? Well, actually, there were 2 points. First, there was a Donbass issue with a settlement plan consisted of 10 points. We showed examples how to deal with this. And the second one was the Crimea. I was insisting, and still do. Back then, it was a problem that Russia didn't have globally recognized borders, and I suggested that Russia could come forward with an initiative of an international conference, because it seemed that 80 or 90% were supporting this idea. So we could organize this conference, and if I participated in it, I would suggest that we organized a referendum under the auspices of the UN or EU, and kind of cover the topic. But you can't do it like this, you know. You can't run elections or referendum at the gunpoint. Though generally speaking, this subject of a big catastrophe, this is actually the subject of 2014. And I did my best to prevent it. But it was growing. It was growing even before, because the second war in Chechnya was horrible. They were killing everybody at random. And if to say a few things about the West, during the Second Chechen War, the West continued giving loans, and IMF participated in this. But I have to tell you, the situation back then was horrible. Many people were killed, many civilians were killed. But you know, if Russia could receive loans back then, why it can't get them today? But could you tell me how Putin reacted to your proposal of international conference? He was just silent. Well, at least when I was talking to him, he was just silent. As soon as I spoke about Ukraine, he went silent. He listens to me, but keeps silence. At what point you realized what plans Vladimir Putin has for Ukraine? Well, if we talk about the concrete plans, well, I mean the plans that we witness today. Well, actually, he wrote about them. Yes, of course, but before that, in 2002, I wrote this paper that was called Demodernization. And there I wrote that in Russia, they created a political system that will lead us to something like this. I probably was afraid or wasn't ready to write a war, but I did say that it could be totalitarian or more authoritarian, imperial regime with a certain ideology. It was clear. It wasn't really nationalistic, it was more chauvinistic, because it's chauvinism, when one nation is telling the other that the other nation is nothing. So actually his article is all about it. He said it directly. So what else? Not to see it, you must be from this little Russian elite and keep playing this smart voting game, voting for communists. You must be lightheaded to do that. I mean, everything that was happening back then, after his second article that he wrote. But in fact, he was quite vocal about this topic. In 2008, he said that we have no claims for Ukraine when he was interviewed by IRD, and he said that there were no problems with Crimea. This is when they interviewed him about Georgia. He said, we have no problems with Ukraine or no problem with the Crimea. He kind of said, they're on their own. It was in 2008. The Crimea is not a disputable territory. They didn't have any ethnic conflict comparing it with South Ossetia and Georgia. And long ago, Russia recognized borders of today's Ukraine. And a question about this type of issues are quite provocative.
Григорий Алексеевич, можно тогда в сторону немножко от сегодняшнего дня и от Путина, мы еще к нему вернемся обязательно. Пожалуйста. На ваш взгляд, вот если рассматривать недавнюю историю,
talk about this more, but what do you think, if we look at Russia, what was happening in it in 1980s and in 1990s, what do you think? What was that event or a decision? What was it that made everything inevitable? Everything that's happening today, what kind of event was it? There are two. There are two events. First one, this is how we did the reforms in 1990s. And there were two key developments back then. One of them was hyperinflation, and they actually made it consciously. In other words, any true expert, true economist would know that this is what's going to happen, because in Russia they did not have any private enterprise. And on one day, on January 2nd, 1992, they freed up the prices and they launched hyperinflation. In a year, the inflation was 2,600%. So what was it? If we say it bluntly, it was confiscation. Because people had no property, I mean, car and an apartment, but all their savings were gone. And the next step was privatization. But how to do privatization if all money is gone? So you can only do it criminally, and it was done criminally. And this crime was in loans for shares auctions, which was actually all lie, because they were just passing property between themselves. And it was the merger of property and authority. And when property and authorities, they merge, and business included, you can't have independent justice, or independent media, or independent parliament. All these things are impossible in this situation, because this merger is so vicious that always defends itself and creates such a governance system that keeps people away from everything that's going on in the country. Just to give you an idea about the scale of it, well, let's take some of the enterprises back then. So it's Norilsk Nickel. They were building this factory from 1933 to 1955. 1 million people, prisoners, were building it, and 600,000 people died there. And it's a unique plant. They are located above the Arctic Circle. They have almost 40% of the market. And, this property was just passed to those young businessmen. And none of those who were building this plant had anything from it. No, not a share. And obviously, if people will express their indignation about this, well, then it's going to be a totally different story. So they kept people away from this. And then they decided to appoint a guard for this system, the one who will not touch the system and will protect the system and will save the system. Maybe even bring his own cronies there. So it's a very fundamental issue and it's very deep. So this is number one. It's very serious. And second, they decided not to publicly condemn Stalinism. I mean, it doesn't mean that they had to punish anybody, but they should be absolutely clear about who it was, what it was, and the most important thing was to make such decisions that Stalinism could not be repeated. So this wasn't done. So these two causes, they didn't help to create private property, competition, and the main thing is, it didn't bring us to the separation of powers, the base of the whole thing, and the base was determining the superstructure, and the superstructure was totalitarian. It has all features to become a dictatorship, not just to be an authoritarian, but to be a dictatorship. This is what was happening in the country, right? So now, this frozen conflict with Ukraine. Because when we read memoirs of some famous people, I just read diaries of Alexander Shmeman, an Orthodox priest who lived in the US. He used to go to Congress in Canada, and at the end of 70s and beginning of 1980s, he wrote about this conflict that already existed between Ukrainians and Russians. All these Ukrainian intellectuals used to come to those Congress and how hurt Ukrainian intellectuals are. And he writes there how arrogant Russian intellectuals are not recognizing independence of Ukraine. So what in your head, how did you see this conflict between Ukraine and Russia? Well, Ukraine is different. But if we talk about the end of the 1980s, Vyacheslav Chernevol, a very famous dissident and Ukrainian politician, journalist, he had a very close working relationship with Sergei Kovalev, a Russian dissident and politician and human rights activist. Kovalev, Bagaras, Chernevol, they worked together. They knew what they're going to do, what should be done. And then there was this outstanding, quote-unquote outstanding event in Beloverskaya Pusha in Belarus. And this is when they laid this foundation of what's happening today. Overnight, out of the blue, they got at the table and they decided to divide everything according to Soviet borders. I mean, it was at the time when Europe was building the EU and the world was moving towards globalization, and you're making a decision to make this disintegration. Clearly, you don't understand the time and you don't understand what's going on, because there was a completely different way to do it, because there was an economic agreement. It was signed by the majority of the former Soviet republics. You mean this common economic space for those republics, right? Yes, it was signed in October of 1991, and in Belovezhskaya Pusha in Belarus, they destroyed the whole thing. They said that Russia will go alone, we can't wait for anybody, and that's it. So that brought us to disintegration. And after that, we could predict the consequences. The more authoritarian and chauvinistic system got strengthened in Russia, there were more chances that we will have what we have. So what happened in 2014? I wrote an article back then that Russia is creating a belt of instability around itself. And the point was that, the transition from the Soviet system to post-Soviet space meant for all those countries movement towards Europe. And as soon as in 2007 Russia said that it's going to go to some other direction, Russia started tearing up this space. And immediately you have this whole situation with Georgia, with Ukraine, and with Belarus. Russia is a country with 1,000 years history, and almost always it had its own independent foreign policy. And we will continue this tradition today. And what was the reason that Russia decided to go to a different direction in 2007? That was, the idea of Russia's role and place. I mean, Putin's idea. And it stemmed from the system that was created in Russia. Let me extrapolate on that, a little bit more details. This fight against corruption, which was very popular, and it was covering up the main issue, because corruption is a consequence, and it will be always in the system, because that's the core of the system, and there are some other traits for this system. All these people whom they call oligarchs, and they know how shaky their position is, and they will do everything they're told. They will always salute their boss, and that's it. And for this to happen, there were two events. They destroyed a Russian independent NTV channel, and they put Khodorkovsky in prison. And by doing so, they said, so that's it. That's how we're going to go further on. And then there was another theme that I've heard a lot. They were saying that there is no such a country as Ukraine, there is no such people as Ukrainians. They said it was temporary, and Russia will get back to those territories. And when you heard all this, I mean, these ideas, when they were expressing them, there is no such a country as Ukraine, and no people like Ukrainians. I heard it from those who were around the president, so they were saying these things at the end of the 90s, in the beginning of 2000. Could you give us names of these people? I don't think it's worth it. Seriously, it's not worth it. It was such a large event that it's not personal. It didn't depend on a particular person. It was a big-scale event. And I would like to underline that they also played the card of natural resources. They built Russia as oil and gas power. Just imagine. Private property is always suspicious, and the governmental system is merged with business, and all the institutions are adjusted to the system, and the system itself is built on energy resources. At the beginning of 2000, it looked like a country that in one hand it had a pipe with the gas, and in the other hand it had a pipe with oil, and in its head there were economic hallucinations. So the complex of all these things brought us to this point. So this theme, empire, new territories, security in terms of tanks and artillery, this is 19th or the 20th century. And the problem was those who were in power in our country, they didn't understand and still don't understand the time of today. A politician is a person who has only one goal, one purpose: to understand the time and to follow the time, to make decisions that realize demands of the time. Now it is the time when, if you want to be a great country, you have to conquer souls and minds of people, not territories. Because territories won't give you much. You can take the Crimea, or you can take whatever you want. It's not the point. So what are you going to do? Are you going to get contributions from them? No, you will have to pay for them yourself. It's completely different time. That's number one. Second, borders. And they're fighting over those borders. But these borders don't mean anything anymore. Especially after they created the European Union, you can go wherever you want. You can go to the Crimea, you can go to Europe, and it will be even cheaper, you know. And why you want those territories? What do you want to do with them? So then they say, you know, Ukraine wants to go to Europe, but you have to want to go to Europe yourself, because there is no any other way to do it, because this is what is dictated by the time. It's not a matter of choice. It's a matter of the future. You either understand the future and you understand the time, and according to this, you are building your policy and you are leading your country there. Then you can work with young people, then you can work with creative class, and you have this inner energy and dynamics. Or you live with ideas of the first half of the 20th century to the best, or maybe even of the 19th century, and this conflict is the main problem. Why right now people can get their head around this military operation? Because it's very difficult to explain to those external observers that this is a conflict of the 19th century and 21st century. So in other words, we are hostages. On the one hand, of those events of the 1990s, and on the other hand, we are hostages of the idea of the history and of Vladimir Putin and Russia's place in this history. Yes, because we created a system that nothing can be changed. He can be changed. He can be replaced. So we don't have proper institutions for that. There is no election. But on the other hand, you know, the ideas he has, this is what we have. So what I try to do, I try to communicate, but he doesn't want to cooperate. He can listen to anything, economy and stuff, but he doesn't want to hear anything about Ukraine. Well, let's get back to the West. For Americans, this war, what it's about? Is it an ideological war, or it's the finances that you spoke about when you said when you spoke about the Second Chechen War and stuff? Well, you see, we are trapped. And Americans, they're playing with this trap. None of their soldiers, none of their troops takes part in it. Now the whole thing is happening at the expense of Ukrainian lives. And they are kind of playing with this. Because you see, after Afghanistan, they don't want to go anywhere. It was clear. The way they left Afghanistan, it was clear that they not going to want to go anywhere for the next 100 years. But now we ourselves, we got into this. And now they are playing with this story. And by doing this, what are they doing? They're actually moving the whole thing towards some bad ending. And we are actually moving towards that bad ending ourselves. I have no idea how it's going to end. But how it's going to end? I just know it's suicidal. How it can end, I have no idea. I don't know how far it can go. I think that after that, we'll have left nationalistic regime that will be headed by the same Vladimir Putin. Because, they keep saying that this is a fifth column, we have the people who undermine us and we'll spit them out and all that. Because, we Russian people are hurt. They're going to be given an enemy, in a full-fledged enemy, and this is how the whole thing will continue. And the goal is one. They want to destroy Russia. But any people, especially Russian people, they can always distinguish true patriots from scum and traitors, and they will just spit them out like a fly. I'm sure that this self-purification will only strengthen our country. But for Europeans, for the European Union, for France, for Germany, what kind of war is that? For them, it's a great danger, and they're not ready for it, and they can't cope with it. They can't really do anything about it, because they lost the time, because they haven't done anything. 20 years ago, they had to come up with a Marshall Plan for Ukraine. They had to work with Ukraine for real, and then this wouldn't happen. And they had to work with Russia, and not just to be happy that they receive oil and gas and they build the Nord Stream. Again, I want to say, they need to do politics for real. Since you're touching on this subject, I will tell you who cancelled the agreements that Mikhail Gorbachev signed. That was George W. Bush. When he came in 2001, right? And at the beginning of 2000s, when Putin proposed a joint anti-missile defense system to the Secretary General of NATO. And it was published everywhere. So Putin extended his hand, right? He wanted it. And, there was no reply. They didn't even make half a step towards it. So, I have to say that everybody in this story have different responsibility. It's a horrible catastrophe and a tragedy. It's absolutely indescribable. Great number of people die, and it's endless because the events are unfolding in such a way that it doesn't look like they're going to agree on anything in the foreseeable future. Don't you have an impression that Putin, let's put it this way, Merkel left, but when she was in power, it seemed that she had some words to say, she had some buttons to push to find a compromise. And now she left, and there is no any politician in Europe that I think Putin would feel on even terms. Well, you see, this whole thing was happening during the time, and Putin always had special relationship with Germany. It's the biggest economy in Europe. But at some point, Putin just firmly said, so we're going to divide the world to different areas of influence, as they did it in Yalta after the Second World War. So we just need to get China on board. And so he's going to divide the world to these areas, the area of US, Russia, and China. And they're just going to be bosses of each area. But you see, he's trying to do it in our time, and it's impossible. And he's fighting for this. He wants to get to this goal. Two important points: Minsk Accords and those security proposals that the Kremlin sent to NATO and the United States. If one of these documents, for example, well, first of all, could these documents be executed on the side of the United States and Ukraine? And implementation of those proposals, could they prevent the war? Well, first of all, they could not be executed because the main thing in Minsk Accords was that Donbass and Lugansk can veto Kiev's decisions. So it can't go any further, That's why nothing happened. I have no idea why Poroshenko, former Ukrainian president, signed these Minsk Accords. I think he did that because Merkel and Hollande, president of France, they were insisting on this, but they did not understand what's really happening, and they just had to finish the conflict. Again, the situation is extremely serious. And with Ukraine, it's simply tragic. And the prospects of this are very tragic. But I have to say, globally, in the world, there is this phenomenon happening that I would call a political entropy. It's an endless list of different things that are happening. So let it be the UK with its Brexit, let it be Orban in Hungary, let it be Poland with its courts, or it's Trump in the US, or India turning into a completely authoritarian country. And this is endless. The list is endless. And what is it? It's a collision with a modern civilization. I mean, it's a collision with digital technologies, with new activities, and where these new technologies, digital technologies, bring us. Everything that has to do with the internet, computers, meta-universe.
Это к чему приводит? Это вот все приводит к тому, что происходит конфликт между прежней
It all brings us to a conflict of the institutions of the previous system and the new reality. These two things, they can't work together, and the system collapses. And in different places, it is expressed differently. You may be surprised looking at how this crowd is storming the Capitol Hill. So what we have, it is expressed in this form here with war and all that. So because we have only 30 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, but they have different forms of it. If you read, because their democracy is 200 or 500 years, and if you read Economist and some other, like Wall Street Journal, and there they discuss in their articles a possibility of civil war in the United States. And the level of discussion is like this, they say that traditionally Republicans have more weapons at home than Democrats, and they can use those weapons better than Democrats. Well, this is, the level of discussion. Sometimes they say, oh no, it's impossible. On the other hand, they still are discussing the probability of the civil war. And here they were also saying that it's impossible. But do you believe that it's possible? I mean, the civil war. I don't know, but I'm very much surprised. I hear what my friends say, and they say that the scale of polarization is very big. And it's not going to be necessarily a civil war. It can be a different form. In our country, it is realized in a war. But there, it can be in some different forms. One question about the European Union. What's happening now? I mean, the war between Russia and Ukraine, may it impact the integrity of the European Union as a single economic and political entity? Yes, it may. Now, this operation that we can call a war, it significantly strengthened NATO, and it will strengthen the European Union. Now they have the enemy. Now they have danger, like real one. It's right there. They didn't believe it. Nobody believed it. Some people called me, those who read my articles and papers, and we discussed the situation in the world. They don't believe in what's happening, and they're not ready to discuss it. But now, the war happened, and it will change the situation with NATO. It will strengthen NATO. In Germany, they reconsidered the budget. They're going to spend more money on weapons. Macron will be chairing the European Union. And besides NATO, he was planning to do some other security system for Europe. So it will be consolidation. It will be quite serious. But what's going to happen to Russia after that? That's a special subject. Okay, about Russia, it's very difficult to predict anything, but with your experience, you might see something. So let's say, as of today, Russian troops were removed from Chernigov region and Kiev region. So what is your feeling? So what's going to happen in Russia and Ukraine? Till what border they may move? What are the goals and stuff? Let me start from the other end, so to speak.
вещах, которые сейчас там
Let me speak about the most important things that should be done.
Первое.
First,
Вы даже не представляете, насколько серьезно
you can't even imagine
ядерная
how serious is a threat of nuclear conflict.
угроза очень серьезная.
Nobody can imagine that, and the threat is extremely serious.
Поэтому первое, о чем
That's why the first thing that all players need to think about, if we can call them players or participants,
игроки неуместные,
the word players is not quite appropriate in this context, but all
принимающим решения, всем участникам,
those who make decisions,
не допустить,
they need to do everything to prevent
потому что
the nuclear conflict,
тема использования, возможности
because a possibility of using tactical nuclear weapons is right on the table.
Вот. Этим надо заниматься.
So this is what we need to deal with. Second,
Может, наша с вами передача.
maybe our interview will help it somehow. Then we need to cease fire.
Это все, больше ничего.
That's it. Nothing else. Just cease fire. That's it. Right now, just
Прекращаем.
make an order, cease fire. And then all the talks,
Договоренности.
and then all the agreements, everything after.
Невозможно ездить в Стамбул,
You can't
там что-то.
go to Istanbul and to beg for something and discuss something while everybody is killing everybody.
Ну, так не пишутся. Я не верю, что так можно.
I don't believe that you can
А сейчас
come to any resolution like that. And also,
одним словом
what's very important is to understand what is war.
отсюда то,
Because from this we have Bucha massacre and many other things like that. And every day you will
пропаганда
hear
с другой стороны.
such news.
Ну, это война.
And on both sides, propaganda will be doing this.
Ну, как вы думаете,
Because it's
можно снаряд
horrible
друг в друга
what's happening. So, and what do you want? If they can throw rockets and shells at each other, so why can't lie to each other and use propaganda against each other?
содержание жизни.
Но вы чуть-чуть
It's just, how life it is.
Вот что этого человека сегодня может заставить принять решение хотя бы в одностороннем порядке, или, я не знаю,
So what do you think? What would force Putin to make a decision to stop it, to make an armistice,
хотя бы с российской
to cease fire, at least on the Russian side? What can force him to do that? It has to be
Решение.
his own decision. Nothing can force him
Вот и все.
to do that. That's it.
Ничего
Nothing.
в этом и дело.
And
Только его
that's
собственное.
the point. Only his own decision.
Всё.
That's it.
Как хотите это оценивайте.
You can look at it differently,
Знание и понимание.
but given my knowledge and understanding of this, my answer is like that.
Нет другого.
Because there is no any other answer to this.
Вот и все.
That's it.
Это очень все серьезно.
And all this is very serious. Again,
Мы сделали систему такую, в которой
we've created a system where
и я еще не сказал,
rulers
что
can act like
вся
this.
наша думающая часть общества,
And again, I have to say that our intellectual, so-called thinking part of the society, they were servicing this system directly or indirectly, but they were doing it
потому что материальный интерес.
because they have quite significant financial interests in it.
Такое с нами случилось.
So that's what it is. This is what happened to us.
Ну вот.
я даже боюсь начинать разговор про
I'm actually afraid of
то, о чем
starting
вы сейчас
a
сказали,
conversation
действующей части общества,
about
так или иначе,
so-called thinking part of the society
систему. У нас же не было
who were servicing this system. Because, we did have this another system. We were living in this system. But, yes, right, we had to
Нет.
а как?
change the system. So we were trying to change it,
Ведь ясно же,
as we could. No, don't as we could.
что нет.
So what happened to it?
Нет.
We knew what's happening to the system. There is no
Так это же надо было делать.
independent media,
Были эти.
independent justice, and there were opportunities to change it. So tell me, what were those opportunities, the ones that we missed?
Я 11 раз участвовал в том, что
Look at me.
проводились выборы.
11 times I participated in so-called elections, 3 times in presidential elections and 7 or 8 times in parliamentary elections. So this latest election, we were saying that there is a war that's going on. There are many people who are against the war. We wrote about it. We wrote this article, particularly for our voters. But you see, there are just that many people who vote for Yabloko, for your party. And as you know, educating people takes a long time. Yes, right. But there were many people who were calling people to vote for communists. There were many of them. And actually, they have all the outlets to engage people in this voting, to call them to vote for communists, to vote for militants from Donbass. Only for them. Vote for them. And you see, really, many people voted for communists in Moscow. And what happened next? They closed Memorial Foundation, this human rights foundation. So that made the communists happy. You know, they had great results. All intellectuals were voting for them. And then they closed Memorial Foundation, and they unanimously voted for it. Yes, according to official data, about 1 million people voted for our party. But if each of those 1 million people brought 10 people, nothing like that would happen. What the official media writes about the results, it's one thing, but they know real results. They see who votes for whom and how they vote. They can write whatever, but they know the reality. So, and actually, election doesn't require anything. You don't have to fight anyone. You don't have to deal with police. You just go and vote on Sunday. But, you know, the authorities, when they saw the results, they see that, you know, it's just 1 million for the whole country that vote against the war. And even 2 millions they could easily process. And even now when they say it's like 80% for the war and only 20 against the war, it's fine, they can deal with that. But how could you explain it? You know, so many people support the war. They support the policy of President Putin. I'll explain it to you. First of all, I have to say that there is no absolute truth. And I don't know it. But I have to tell you that things we said at the beginning of 1990s are confirmed today. In fact, no one knows how many people are pro-war, because to organize polls or surveys under such propaganda and fear, it's absolutely useless. I have a friend who actually does these polls, and they do these polls on the phone and say, they call someone and ask, how are you doing? Are you this and that? Do you live at this address? Is it your phone number? Okay, then tell us, do you support this special military operation of Vladimir Putin in Ukraine? So what do you want this person to say? And of course, out of fear, this person will say yes. Because, you know, today he read in the newspaper, you know, how many people went picketing and then were put in prison. And then in the morning he had to go to work, and he has children. And so do you think that he can sincerely say something honestly to those girls and boys who are calling him on the phone? I think that true sociologists would say today that forget about the polls. You know, we can't organize polls today because people can't say what they think. And first of all, they're stuffed with propaganda, and they're just physically afraid being beaten up on all levels. And that's why we don't know how many people are pro-war. We know nothing about it. And this is a feature of the system. It's very serious. So what do you think? How resilient Russian economy is, given the pace of everything that's happening today when every person in Russia will feel that something is going wrong.
Средний класс,
The middle class will feel it.
средний класс больших городов.
The middle class of big cities. And that's it.
И все. А так это будет
That's
длинная
it.
история.
And for others, it will be a long story.
Вообще не в том, как некоторые пишут, вот будет катастрофа.
You know, some people write that it's going to be a catastrophe, things will collapse. No, nothing like that will happen. No.
Я могу вам рассказать единственную причину, по которой это может быть.
I can tell you what is the only
Индия и Китай перестанут
reason it'll happen. It'll happen if India and China stop buying our energy resources.
Ну, как плевать.
So in other words, you know, if the US and others won't buy anymore, so we kind of don't care. Not really, but, you know, by the way, when you're going to be showing this interview, I don't know when, but now the exchange rate of dollar is like before the war. And maybe it will be like in Soviet time, like 60 kopecks per dollar. But, you know, right now, the exchange rate kind of moved
Это искусственная
back what it was
вещь.
before the war. And it's done artificially. Because, you know, some politicians kind of say, so it's too high rubles per dollar.
На самом деле, это
But the officials say, oh, you know, no.
и так.
The real situation is 70 rubles per dollar. This is what we say. But it's artificial. Okay, to the economy. It's not going to be a catastrophe. Inflation will be very high. The prices will be growing.
Безработица.
Unemployment.
У нас скажут, работай 3 дня в неделю.
In our country, they'll say, work 3 days a week, and then work 1 day a week. Oh, you know what? Go on vacation.
Она не выйдет на поверхность. Но
I don't think the unemployment
12%.
will surface. I think in reality it may be 12%. So now it's 4 or 5%, but then it will be 12%. Yes,
Существовать это все будет. Падение там в этом году будет 8%.
it will exist. You know, this year
Такое чрезвычайное падение. Ну,
the
вот как вы видите, Евросоюз не
slowdown will be like
от
8%.
нефти, не от газа. Он только мучается этим вопросом, но не отказывается. И там
But
есть
see, the
такие
West,
настойчивые
they're still buying oil and gas, and there are such countries as Austria and Hungary,
коллективные решения.
and they have to make collective decisions in the European Union, and those two countries are against that, and they say we need to buy energy resources. But I just don't understand why in the West they can't explain that their decision to stop buying Russian energy resources is not going to do much. In fact, you know, it's going to harm them
Они объясняют, только
the
это не
most.
слышно. У нас же
Yes,
тоже
they are
бывает,
explained, but they can't quite hear it, you know. Here, the same happens in Russia. When somebody's trying to explain something, they're not heard.
нанесет вред, конечно.
Тем, кто живет в Европе.
All these sanctions will harm, of course, and those who live in Europe and the global economy too.
Комплекс. Я не обсуждаю сейчас.
It's a broad complex of issues. I'm not discussing if it should be done or not, if the sanctions are needed or not. It's not my business. So if they decided to impose sanctions, that's their business. But my short answer to you is that catastrophe is not going to happen. I mean, economic catastrophe.
Она так вот не просматривается. И
We can't quite see it, but this is what's going to happen.
будет медленная,
There will be a slow
очень глубокая
but very
модернизация.
deep demodernization,
Все, Россия будет
regression.
с каждым годом. Темпы роста будут в лучшем случае 1%, 0, реальные. Вот.
The growth rate will be 1, 0, or 1.5%.
С каждым днем. С каждым днем.
And every day, the country will be lagging behind.
Что ее подхватит Китай.
Russia hopes that it will be supported by China, but this is a complex question, complex matter, because
Штаты, они Россия.
China has more interests with the United States, not in Russia.
Как Китай будет с Россией обходиться,
And how China is going to treat Russia, given the territorial issues and all that, we don't know.
Вот соединение вот от той политической
So what's going to happen, you know, if we talk about all this political transformation, when all things kind of come together, when you say this left nationalism looking for inner enemies, plus this deep recession,
Вот это взаимосвязано.
all those things come together, yes, right. So what we may expect in 5, 10, or 15 years.
Сказать
It's very hard for me to say about timeline because the speed of change is enormous. But there will be a burst because everything that's happening now shows us this tragic mistake. It is a tragic mistake, but every mistake should be paid for. They will look for whom to blame and what's going to remain here after that, I don't know. But after that, things that will remain, I'll tell you this. We need to return to the time. We need to begin to understand how the world is shaped, and we need to build the country according to the historical phase we're in. Well, Vladimir Putin is going to do this. Well, I don't know. I'm talking about us. We all live in this country. He doesn't understand, and he does everything to the contrary. But I'm very serious. Another example. They say danger, weapons, hypersonic weapons, hypersonic missiles. They fly from Germany 3 minutes longer than from Poland, and maybe 2 minutes longer than from somewhere else. But between Estonia, Latvia, and St. Petersburg, it takes very insignificant time. The whole thing is very different. The security system is completely different, and it should be understood why so many generals of Russia were killed, because all of them spoke on cell phones. Nothing like that ever happened before. The situation is very serious, and people are killed on both sides, and it will go on like this, and it will be endless. And then, from what will be left, we will have to build something, taking into account what's happening in that time. So you asked me a very interesting question when you quoted Mirat Mamerdashvili, a philosopher and pedagogue from Georgia. He had to participate in political life in Georgia when Gamsahurdia came in power, and according to Mamardashvili, it was a horrible event, and he was not afraid of stepping up when all people were voting for Gamsahurdia, and he would go to this hall that is filled with Georgians, and he told them this great phrase that the truth is higher than homeland. And actually, this kind of killed him. He died of a heart attack. It's a very serious subject. I quoted him in that article that we discussed before. Actually, when he was saying things about Gamsahurdia, he said, if my people will vote for Gamsahurdia, I will be against my people. This phrase of his, it's polemic, but in fact there is no contradiction in it. We and our homeland and the truth, it is all one. And the truth, this is the process. This is the process that is needed for our homeland. What was done in the middle of 1980s, they let people speak what they want, speak the truth, the way they understood it. And it was enough for things to change. That's why the matter of the truth and homeland, it's not a contradiction. If you love your homeland, it's like with children. It's a movement, it's a difficult one with setbacks and difficult impediments and all that, but it's movement towards the truth. And this is your homeland. This is something that you do for it. If you speak in those categories, that's why you can't really compare them, your homeland and the truth. It's like you're comparing pounds and miles. Pounds are pounds and miles are miles. Your homeland is your homeland and the truth is the truth. And more than that, these two are interconnected. I've been thinking about it too when you asked that question, and I wanted to share it with you. Today when you speak to people, they have one thought. What if, they say, somebody will push the button, stop button, and everything will return to its normal, as if nothing was happening, kind of return the whole thing to how it was before. No, it's not going to happen like that. No, not that simple. What will happen is just what I told you. I don't know how the whole thing will end. I only know what to do. I know what to do. I told you two things, just to stop it. It is such a thing that if you want to get out of it, you have to stop it. Just stop it. You can bring anybody, you do any demarcation lines and stuff, but you need to stop it. And then after that, you may think about something else. Strategies, how to act when you are in Russia. We have what we have. We have President Putin, we have elections, and we can probably say that things will be whatever. I don't know how to call it. There will be something different. For people who are in Russia, what are they supposed to do? I mean, teachers, people who understand that the war is a catastrophe. Those people who didn't leave, who are in the country, what are they supposed to do? Well, first of all, I can't say who has to do what, but I can say a couple of things. For example, I can tell you what to do, or what I should do. We need to talk to the people. It's a very important matter. Now there is no time to talk to those who left and who came and whatever. They can read books and they'll figure it out on their own. But to talk to the people, it's a completely different thing. It's a challenge. I'm telling you a very important thing. It's an incredible challenge. It's very difficult. You need to learn how to do it. I've been participating in elections for 30 years. I traveled across the country. I spoke to so many people. There are two things. One of them is respect and the other is justice. These two things are extremely important to anybody. You go to any place, to the middle of nowhere, and if you sit down to drink with someone, and during the third glass, they will tell you, do you respect me? And for people, it is very important, philosophically speaking. And the sense of justice, at least a sense of it, what justice is. Realization of these two fundamental things. I don't know about other people, I'm talking about our people. The realization of these two fundamental things is going through these modern political forms. Separation of powers, inalienable private property, independent courts. Then you feel like a human being. When you have home. I found out that the problem is that people don't respect themselves. and they don't respect themselves because they don't even have a home. They don't even have a piece of land. They have nothing. Work and that's it. And it comes from those old days. Once I was at a mine, and that miner, he worked for 12 hours, yet his norm is 6 hours, but he had to work 12. He comes home and he has nothing there. He has this 2-room apartment somewhere there in the north of Russia. Then it's impossible to live like that. And then you have to explain it to people where they should go, what they should do, how things could be realized. At some point when we have time, I can give you some concrete examples how those two things could be realized. I mean, justice and respect and self-respect. This is extremely important to learn how to do it, and people don't really know how to do that. People actually speak to themselves very beautifully, eloquently, and that's it. And all these talks for themselves, that was perestroika, then there were the 90s, and this is where we ended up. The problem is how to reach out, and you see Russian authorities now, they monopolized all TV channels. They speak the same thing. There are 10 channels, 20 channels, or 30 channels, I have no idea, but they speak about the same thing. And it affects a lot, and the internet doesn't really resolve this issue. But how? No, I don't know how. I'm just telling you what. How is another issue. So what the goal is, what we need to achieve, there should be a dialogue with our people. We must be heard by our people. Because our people were failed twice. First, they believed that Bolshevik socialism could be built, and it turned out to be a lie. And then, after that, they believed that after this Bolshevik socialism, they can build a modern European country. And again, after 30 years, they showed them that it didn't work out. They were lied again. There is elite, there are rich people, but regular people, they didn't achieve anything. And these are two serious disappointments for the Russians. But I have to tell you this, that in the history of our country, there was this time when something actually happened. You know, how Bolsheviks do this. You know, they didn't have TV, they didn't have radio, nothing. They were going around and explaining to people, well, you see, the problem today is that we have television. Yes, right. Yes, right. However, one guy, if I may say so, he managed to do that. He didn't have television, he had only newspapers and radio, and for 5 years, he turned an educated country, very educated country, and I'm talking about Germany, very educated country with a great cultural heritage. Simply using newspapers and radio, he turned them around. What can you tell those young men with families or without them who decide to leave the country? Well, I don't know. This is their decision. There are hundreds of thousands of people, yes, right, but this is their decision. I can't really guarantee them anything. They have children, they have their wives. I'm not going to leave, but this is their business. Have you ever had this idea over the last 20 years? No. This is my life and my work. Where can I go? I'm responsible. You know, you just said that many people voted for me. Well, not really for me, but for the party. And, you know, this time in the parliamentary elections, I didn't run. What can you tell Ukrainians if we read social media in Ukraine and we hear the same blame from them, and yet they say, you Russians are slaves. For 30 years you didn't do anything, and you can't really do anything with your authorities that waged this war. What can you tell them?
Ну, это же правда.
Well, what they say is true, right?
Ну, что я скажу?
What can I say?
Все. Знаете, я нахожусь в несколько сложном
You
положении.
know, I'm
Потому что я
in quite a complicated
сейчас.
situation
Потому что я не хочу обсуждать
because
принципиально Украину.
I principally don't want to discuss Ukraine, and actually for many years I don't give interviews to Ukrainian media.
Этого не делал. Это
I haven't done it for a while, and that's just my decision.
несколько раз просил Гордона.
Several times Ukrainian journalist Dmitry Gardon asked me for an interview, but I decided not to. Why did I decide that? Because I'm a Russian politician. I'm not going to teach or educate Ukrainians, but everything that I want to tell you about Russia, I can tell you, or I can write about it while I can.
Я не готов им давать советы.
I'm not ready to give them any advice.
Я не готов.
No, I'm not
У
ready.
меня другая ответственность.
My responsibility is
И
different.
в этой ситуации
And, you know, in this situation, I don't think that it would be appropriate
ну, а что же?
to give them
Ну, речь идет
advice.
Ну, я вам так скажу.
Let me put it this way.
Ну, я 11 раз предлагал не быть рабами.
11 times I offered people not to be slaves.
Вы должны знать, политик может только предложить.
You need to know that a politician can only offer, they can't force people to do anything unless he's a president and he has a police state. But if it's just a politician
В плоскости он может только
who works publicly,
сказать, вот
he can only offer
а потом будет момент, когда вы должны прийти и проголосовать. Вот
and say, you know, so vote for me
говорили, вот проголосуйте.
and
Смотрите,
I will do it for you.
опубликовал
Last summer we told them, you know, vote for us, you know, because Putin published this doctrine and he said that Ukraine is not a state and Ukraine has territories that belong to Russia. So what it was not clear, and he put the Minister of Defense
президентской правящей партии.
on the top of the list of his party. So what else you need to understand? What should be explained? No, people don't want to understand anything.
Те, которые
They don't. Those who can actually hear me.
вот они не слышат.
But those who don't hear, so they just don't hear. So, but I did everything I could.
Ну, что еще может сделать?
What else could be done?
Вы вот так ставите вопрос, я уже
You know, when you
отвечал.
ask this question like that,
Все несут ответственность за то, что происходит.
yes, I do think that everybody is responsible for what's going on.
Другое дело, что ответственность, она разная.
However, this responsibility
Кому-то 20 тысяч штраф,
is different for everyone. You know, for some people it's 20,000 rubles fine, but for some people it's a life sentence. You know, I also have responsibility. For example, that I didn't manage to convince you
только об этом и говорите.
that that's the only thing that should be talked about. And maybe I didn't convince someone else. Maybe I did not call you to do anything.
Это же была моя работа.
Maybe I didn't manage to get through to you. It's my work, but I couldn't, right?
А как иначе еще это объяснить?
So how else
Своя ответственность.
can I explain that? Everybody has their own responsibility, and it's not
Я знаю только
my place to grade people. I know only one thing, that people who were saying that people could vote for pedophiles, homophobes, communists, whoever.
понимают,
These are the people who do not understand how politics work.
в этом с ними
And they think that they do. This is the problem with them. They're kind of great experts in their own area. Some of them are great writers or musicians or actors or economists or doctors, professors. Well, politics is profession too, right? Yes.
уверены, что они
But they are sure that they know everything.
уверены, что
They know how it works. And they know that they could figure it out.
это ведь феномен
But you see, it's a phenomenon
группы.
of this type of people, of this group of people. And for the first time, this
В общем, известно,
research was done by Joseph Schumpeter. This is very famous economist and sociologist from Austria. And he was studying this group of people, and he made a conclusion that
как и футбол.
they are professionals in their areas, but they speak about politics, they think about politics like they think about football game. because they are sure that no matter what happens, because they're good dentists or they're good actors, everything will be fine with them. So, and this writer will be published anyway, so things will be fine. And he wrote about it. This is when Austria and Hungary Empire collapsed, and he wrote about it for Austrian intellectuals. And then he finished his work after 1945. But back then he could not imagine that there will be Holocaust, that there will be gas chambers. It didn't even cross their mind where the whole thing can lead them. That's why it's a serious profession. It is no less serious than medicine. So if you eat glass, you need to understand what consequences can be. But they're telling you there will be consequences, and you say, oh, maybe not. Yes, there will be, sooner or later, but you'll get them. Maybe my example is a bit eccentric, but I just want to convey my thought. Politics is a very serious thing, and you must be an expert in it. And you can't think that anybody can figure it out. No. I'm saying let them do what they do, but what we need to do, we need to learn how to talk to the people, and it's very difficult. It's extremely complicated task, but this is what is necessary, and this is where the future is, if we have that future. But regarding Ukraine, I can only ask for forgiveness, and I know it's impossible. They can't forgive anyone because many people were killed. What else I can add to it? Thank you, Grigory Alekseyevich.